Welcome to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum, Oregon's premier public affairs forum. I'm Jim ZEHREN, President-elect of City Club. Our forum today is made possible in part by the generous contributions of our corporate sponsors for this quarter. They are KeyBank, Zimmer Gunsel Frasca Architects, and the law firm of Schwabe, Williamson & Wyatt. We thank them for their support. Today's program will continue our primary election season series of political debates. Today's debate will be between Jeff Merkley and Steve Novick, the two leading candidates for the Democratic nomination for their office of the United States Senator from Oregon in the position now held by Republican Gordon Smith. Today's debate will be moderated by Dr. Peter Steinberger. Dr. Steinberger is Dean of Faculty and the Robert H. and Blanche Day Ellis Professor of Political Science and Humanities at Portland's Reed College. Peter Steinberger received both his BA and MA from Fordham University and his doctorate from the University of California at Riverside. He is the author of numerous books, essays, and articles in political theory and is an award-winning teacher. Dr. Steinberger will introduce our two debaters and also will explain the rules of procedure for today's debate. Before turning the program over to Dr. Steinberger, I want to remind everyone here that by means of these political debates, City Club endeavors to facilitate open and spirited discussion of important public issues. To achieve this objective, it is important for all of us to remember that we honor both of our debaters and our process when we are courteous to our debaters and respectful of the ideas and opinions they express during our debates. Dr. Steinberger?
Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you. This debate will have several sections. First, each candidate will give a 3-minute opening statement. A coin toss determined the order of appearance in this debate. Our timekeeper today is John Horvick. Following the opening statements, candidates will respond to questions suggested in advance of this meeting by City Club members and the general public. A subcommittee of the City Club's Friday Forum Committee composed the final set of questions. These are the only questions that will be asked today. There will be no questions from the floor. We will rely on the judgment of our distinguished panel of City Club members seated below to decide whether or not the questions have indeed been answered by the candidates. If 2 or more of these members raise their cards, indicating that they feel a question has not been answered, I will restate the question and ask the candidate to reply again. Sounds like a tough audience. On our panel, we have Jody Heinz, Tamsin Wassell, and Patty Tillett. Following the City Club's questions, each candidate will have the opportunity to ask 3 questions of the other. Following the rotation of candidate questions, each candidate will make a 3-minute closing statement. Throughout, the rules of this debate identify specific time limits on the length of statements and answers. In my opinion, fairness requires that these time limits be enforced strictly, and I intend to do that. This may occasionally be unsettling or annoying to you, specifically when I have to interrupt the speaker who has not yet finished, and I apologize in advance for that, but again, I think fairness and impartiality require, in this case, strict adherence to the specified rules. Please be respectful of the candidates. City Club staff have emphasized to me that I emphasize to you, please hold all applause Please hold all applause until the end of the program. Jeff Merkley earned an undergraduate degree from Stanford University and a master's degree in public policy from the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton. He then served as a national security analyst, first in the Pentagon and then in the Congressional Budget Office. After returning to Oregon, Mr. Merkley served as the local director for Habitat for Humanity and the director of housing and development at Human Solutions, and founded Oregon's first individual development account program to help low-income families save money to buy homes, attend colleges, and start businesses. Mr. Merkley also served as president of the World Affairs Council of Oregon, and in 1998, the voters in Portland's House District 47 elected him to the legislature, where he is now serving his 5th term. In 2003, Mr. Merkley was elected by fellow Democratic House members to the position of House Democratic Leader, and in 2006, he became the Speaker of the Oregon House of Representatives. Steve Novick earned an undergraduate degree from the University of Oregon and a law degree from Harvard Law School. After working briefly for New York and San Francisco law firms, Mr. Novick joined the Environmental Division, then known as Land and Natural Resource Division of the United States Department of Justice. At the Justice Department, he served as lead counsel on the Love Canal toxic waste cleanup suit. Returning to Oregon, Mr. Novick worked as policy director for Tom Breguer's 1996 Senate bid, and then as chief of staff for the Oregon Senate Democrats. He then went on to be the executive director for the Center for Constructive Citizen Action. In 2002, Mr. Novick was policy director for Ted Kulongoski in his first successful campaign for governor. From 2004 to 2006, he worked for Citizens for Oregon's Future, an organization that provides taxpayers with useful information on tax and budget issues. He was also a member of the board of the Oregon Environmental Council for over a decade. Currently, Mr. Novick is Senior Project Manager for Pyramid Communications, a consulting firm that works primarily for nonprofit organizations, tribal, and other public sector clients. Will the candidates please take their podiums? Well, thank you for your applause, and we will hold off applause henceforth until the end of the debate. Opening statements. Mr. Merkley, please begin with your opening statement. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your gracious introduction. City Club members and fellow Oregonians, the last time I was at this podium about a year ago, I was laying out a vision for the 2007 legislature, a vision fighting for families, for children, for workers, and for our planet. And I'm glad to report today that every single point of that agenda was enacted into law in 2007. When I see a challenge, I bring people together to find solutions. To build strong families, I opened doors to homeownership at Habitat for Humanity and led the charge to end the triple-digit payday loan sharking here in our state. For workers, I fought to protect the minimum wage and create living wage jobs. For children, I fought for affordable, accessible health care for every child. For our environment, I fought to enact plans that saved Oregon's land use system and put Oregon at the forefront of the green economy in the fight to stop global warming. I fought so hard for gay and lesbian families that Karen Minnis cut off my mic on the House floor and threatened to have state troopers remove me. But I kept right on fighting, and in 2007 won passage of historic legislation for basic rights and domestic partnerships. And today, I'm proud to announce that my campaign has received the endorsement of Basic Rights Oregon. This is the new politics of hope and change that I have fought for all my life, to see a problem, to bring people together, and to lead the fight for change. When the Oregon government was paralyzed, I led a band of progressives to take back control of the Oregon House and bring the politics of hope and change to the state capitol. Together, we took on the special interest. Together, we solved problems for our families, our children, our workers, and our planet. But here's the thing. If we don't make fundamental change in Washington, D.C., Oregon can only go so far. We should reject the professional political consultant hack and attack politics and bring the new politics of partnership and problem solving to our nation's capital. We need the politics of results, not insults. We need to end the war in Iraq, which Gordon Smith has so willfully embraced. We need to stop outsourcing American jobs, reversing Gordon Smith's trade policy and tax policy. We need to take on global warming, which Gordon Smith has set by and ignored. We need to make health care more affordable and accessible by listening to nurses like my wife, Mary, not by pandering to big drug and insurance companies as Gordon Smith has.
30 seconds.
We need the new politics of hope and change, to take on the crippling national debt, to invest in quality education, to build a knowledge economy here in Oregon and in America, and to reestablish the integrity of the United States at home and abroad. I will fight to bring change in Washington, D.C. in a way that Gordon Smith never, ever has and never, ever will.
Mr. Novick, your opening statement, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Peter. Hi, I'm Steve Novick, and I'm running for the United States Senate. When I started this campaign a year ago, I was the decided underdog. I still like to call myself the underdog, but it's getting harder and harder to get away with it. Every poll has showed that I'm ahead in this race and the stronger challenger to Gordon Smith. We've generated a lot of excitement around this state and around the country. But you really know you've made it when your opponent starts attacking you. Speaker Merkley has attacked me for saying something nice about Ralph Nader in 1998. He said that I was missing in action in the run-up to the war in Iraq, when in fact I was marching in the streets. And recently, he's conducted a whole poll figuring out new ways to attack me, saying that I'm pro-tax, that I've worked on political campaigns, that I'm not serious. Now, that's all very flattering. It shows that Speaker Merkley and the people running his campaign are, as we would have said when we were kids, freaking out. But the important thing is why my campaign is getting traction. People are looking for leaders who are honest, who are principled, who are willing to give a straight answer to a simple question. In this campaign, I've talked not just about the need to extend healthcare coverage, but the need to control costs. And sometimes I've talked about things to do that would mean some providers would make less money. I've talked about the need to provide healthcare to all, to invest in renewable energy, to preserve Social Security and Medicare, and I've said we're going to need to pay for those things. And the great thing is the reaction I get when I say that. When I talk to doctors about healthcare reform, one radiologist told me, oh, absolutely. Listen, I make a lot of money under the current system. I'm on the gravy train, but I know the system has to change. When I talk to wealthy folks about the need to pay for important public services through fair taxation, they say to me, that's right. And you know what I think is crazy? That I stopped paying the Social Security tax after my income hits $100,000. That's how we're going to beat Gordon Smith, by going after him on the issues, asking him where he's been on the big challenges facing the country. Senator Smith, you spent 2 years as the chair of a special subcommittee on reducing the national debt. What did it do? Senator Smith, you sponsored a special tax break for multinational corporations that gave Pfizer alone $11 billion. What did that get us? Senator Smith, where's your health care plan? Ron Wyden has one. People in this state, people in this country are ready to do what it takes to meet the big challenges. They're ready to become the new greatest generation. All they need is principled, progressive leaders to show them the way.
We will now move to the portion of the program where I will ask the questions prepared in advance by City Club members and the general public. The candidate to whom the question is directed will have 60 seconds to respond to the question. Following each answer, the opposing candidate will have the option of a 45-second rebuttal. The candidates have not seen these questions in advance. First question is for Mr. Novick. The U.S. Senate is an institution where seniority plays a key role in committee assignments that determine whether a member can get things done for his or her state. If our current Republican U.S. Senator is replaced by you or your opponent, why won't Oregon's interests and political objectives be diminished? You have 60 seconds to respond.
Senator Smith's seniority hasn't done us much good. I'll give one example, the issue of county payments, payments to rural Oregon counties. He wasn't able to get his party, when they were in control, he wasn't able to get a Republican president, a Republican Congress to extend the county payments. And why is that? It's because he has no credibility on fiscal issues. Here's a guy who poses as a moderate by being for all the spending and for all the tax cuts. So when he goes to his colleagues and says, I want a few $100 million for Oregon, they say, why didn't you think of that before you gave $11 billion to Pfizer? I think that the members of the United States Senate and of the House will appreciate a colleague who's working with them to solve the big problems, who's willing to take strong stands and propose real solutions to the problems they're all dealing with.
Mr. Merkley, you have the option of a 45-second rebuttal.
Seniority doesn't do you much good if you're on the wrong side of the issues. In fact, it hurts us here in Oregon. It hurts to have a senator like Senator Smith canceling out Wyden 90% of the time. That means that we have no voice. You know, it's hard enough that we don't have a voice very often in our primary elections. It's hard enough that sometimes in a presidential election, the polls close and the predictions are made before we close our polls here in Oregon. But to go through 6 years of a Senate term with 2 senators canceling each out makes no sense at all. We need to have a senator that will work with Senator Wyden, that will fight the battles for our children, battles for our workers, and battles for our planet.
Thank you. Question for Mr. Merkley. Most Democrats running for office are now touting what they call a responsible plan to withdraw troops rapidly from Iraq. But it's quite possible that withdrawing our troops rapidly will result in even greater civil conflict and bloodshed in Iraq. Please move past the rhetoric and explain how we can genuinely be responsible by removing our troops so rapidly. You have 60 seconds to respond.
I encourage everyone to go to my website and take a look at this responsible plan because it embraces a whole set of proposals. But let me summarize. We need to work with the nations surrounding Iraq to avoid a broader war. We need to have a plan that brings our troops out of combat roles and checkpoints over a 6 to 12-month period as the vacuum is filled in by tribal and governmental leaders. We need to remove our bases from Iraq. We need to remove those bases so that our legacy is not an effort to control the government of Iraq and the oil of Iraq. And we need to rebuild Iraq, but we need to do it through Iraqi contractors. American contractors can't go 100 yards down the road without a security contingent. That makes no sense at all. Instead, we should invest through the Iraqi contractors to build the economy of that nation. But here's the bottom line. We've put a stick in a hornet's nest. That stick remains an irritant. We need to get that stick out. We need to bring our sons and daughters home. We need to start doing so now.
Thank you. Mr. Novick, you have the option of a 45-second response.
Unfortunately, we can't promise that everything will be sweetness and light in Iraq when we bring our troops home. We are largely responsible for causing the problems in Iraq, but unfortunately, having caused a problem doesn't mean that you can solve it. I've talked to returning service people who say we cannot solve the problems of Iraq by staying there indefinitely. I agree largely with what the speaker said. We need to set a firm timetable for withdrawal, and then we need to work with the nations surrounding Iraq. We need to say to them, you've got a refugee problem now. It might be worse if you don't work with us to try to craft a political solution before we come home. But we have to come home.
Question for Mr. Novick. Both you and your opponent are progressive Democrats who have nearly the same positions on most issues. You both support universal health coverage, environmental protection, a so-called responsible end to the war in Iraq, and more. In fact, you both even supported John Edwards for president. Give us at least one example of how you differ on a substantive policy question. You have 60 seconds to respond.
One difference is, I think that people who make $1 million a year should pay Social Security tax on all their income. Speaker Merkley is content with the current situation where you only pay it on the first $100,000. Another difference is, I think people who make their money buying and selling stock should always pay the same tax rate as working families. Speaker Merkley is content with them paying a lower tax rate. Another difference is, when a few weeks ago Gordon Smith said that he wanted to end a 70-year-old rule and allow people to carry loaded guns in national parks, I agreed with park rangers that was a silly idea. Speaker Merkley said he didn't know where he stood. There are a variety of significant policy differences between me and Speaker Merkley.
Thank you. Mr. Merkley, you have the option of a 45-second response.
You know, here's the thing about Social Security. It's a bedrock contract between our generation and the next. Just a few years ago, Steve said it was solvent for many years to come and that it was a manufactured Republican attack in an effort to privatize Social Security. And indeed, that's exactly what it was. And last week, a study came out and said it's solvent to 2041. But the real issue of insolvency is not Social Security. It's Medicare. It's in our healthcare system. That is the time bomb that is ticking. I'm not interested in these modest differences designed to drive a campaign wedge. I'm interested in taking the big issues on, like the solvency of Medicare, like the fact that we have 50 million Americans without access to health care.
Time, thank you. Question for Mr. Merkley. You are both progressive Democrats who reside in solidly Democratic urban areas. How will you represent all Oregonians, not just the Democrats who share your urban sensibilities and progressive views? What evidence can rural Oregonians look to in your record that indicates you understand and will advocate for their needs? You have 60 seconds.
I'm proud to be the son of rural Oregon, from a mill worker in Myrtle Creek. And when the mill shut down, we went to Roseburg, where I learned to swim in the Umpqua River. Roseburg, timber town, and we followed the economy. As the economy changed in Roseburg, moved up here to Portland. And then over the last 4 years, working to create a progressive majority in the Oregon House, I have gone to every corner of this state. I've talked with very tiny communities in Eastern Oregon, in Central Oregon, in Southern Oregon, on Coastal Oregon. Talked about all kinds of issues. And I find it very easy to connect, coming from a timber family, coming from a working class family. I organized a group and asked Senator Peter Courtney to partner with me to take this group out and visit the timber-afflicted counties in our state. And then I created a rural policy committee in the Oregon House, and they went out and visited a lot more counties. And then I went back to Washington, D.C., and I lobbied Senator Reid and Senator Schumer.
Thank you. Mr. Novick. You have the option of a 45-second response.
I've visited 24 counties in this campaign, and I've gotten a great reception in rural Oregon. Rural Oregonians know that they need health care. They're fiscally responsible. They believe in fairness. And they know that I'm a kid from Cottage Grove. So we are going to win in rural Oregon, just like Peter DeFazio does. People in his district don't think that he's Peter DeFazio, some pointy-headed liberal. They think he's Peter, fighting for the little guy. And I am a little guy. On the Social Security issue, it's curious that Speaker Merkley thinks I manufactured this distinction. I can show him the letter to the editor that the New York Times printed in 1998, where I advocated the wealthy, saying that...
Question for Mr. Novick. Thank you. First, for a little background. A century ago, the federal government recognized the difficult economic situation that many counties faced due to federal ownership of large tracts of land. So Congress passed laws to deliver federal timber harvest revenue to counties. Given the dramatic decline of timber harvests over the past 2 decades, Congress passed legislation in 2000 to provide payments to counties based on average historical timber revenues. Congress recently passed an emergency temporary extension of this legislation, but it's likely that federal timber payments to counties are coming to an end. As a senator, how specifically would you address the likely decline or elimination of federal forest payments to counties? You have 60 seconds to respond.
I'll begin by completing my previous thought because it actually relates. I'm on record since 1999 in saying that wealthy folks should pay their fair share of Social Security taxes. I think that's a matter of fairness regardless of whether there was any threat to Social Security. And the fact that I'm willing to say that we've got to pay for important things, the fact that I'm willing to take some strong stands will help me making the argument that we deserve to continue the county payments not as welfare, but as a substitute for property taxes the federal government, which owns so much of our state, doesn't pay. I will say, look, If you're going to subsidize people for not producing cheese, you can give us a little something for not cutting trees. I will point out that when Mark Hatfield was chair of appropriations, we didn't get a whole lot of defense pork because he was one of those darn peaceniks. And I will be helping my fellows in Congress to solve the long-term fiscal situation by...
Thank you for your answer. Mr. Merkley, you have 45 seconds to respond.
Working to restore these payments is essential because there was a deal made between the federal government and our timber counties here in Oregon. They said, we're not going to allow you to cut this federal forest land, but you know what? We're going to compensate you for the taxes. Well, now the federal government is failing to uphold its end of the bargain. And that's a breach of social contract that has no place in our nation. We are in partnership with a number of other states getting the short end of this deal. We have to work in partnership with the other states to preserve these payments. But we need to do more. We need to revitalize the economic life of our rural counties. They're interested in how we can develop water effectively and use it better, how we can have a better rural infrastructure for transportation.
Thank you very much. Question for Mr. Merkley. On your campaign website, you state that as a U.S. Senator, you would work toward expanded and affordable access to health care. But during your tenure in the Oregon House, the legislature has done little to expand health care and make it more affordable. Given this record, why should voters trust you to make health care more affordable and accessible were you to serve as a U.S. Senator? You have 60 seconds to respond.
Well, I take issue with your description because it was under my leadership that we pursued a bulk purchase drug program to make drugs more affordable. It was on my leadership that we passed in the Oregon House a constitutional change to send out to citizens that would make health care a constitutional fundamental right in our state. Unfortunately, it did not pass in the Senate. It is under my leadership that we took on greater transparency with our insurance companies. You know, we have a lot to do on health care, but we need to have a federal government and a federal senator that believes that health care for every man, woman, and child is a critical part of a thriving society. That is exactly what I believe, and that's exactly what I've fought for, and that's exactly what I'll fight for as a U.S. Senator.
Mr. Novick, you have 45 seconds to respond.
Well, what happened in the legislature on health care demonstrates again that if you want public services, you have to pay for them. The legislature did what it could with the money that it had, but it didn't have the money to restore the tens of thousands of people who were cut off the Oregon Health Plan in the last recession. And if we're going to extend health care to all, somebody's gonna have to pay for it. Either we adopt a single payer system funded through tax dollars, which I'd support if we could get it before the Senate, or you adopt a plan such as Senator Wyden's plan, Senator Edwards, Senator Clinton's, where you say that everybody has to buy health insurance, you subsidize them if they're below a certain level of income, and every employer has to make some contribution towards health care costs.
Thank you. Question for Mr. Novick. For better or worse, the U.S. Senate is a clubby institution where personal relationships grease the wheels for getting things done. How will your personal style, reputed to be prickly and impatient with those whose minds aren't as quick as yours, work in such an institution? You have 60 seconds to respond.
I'm sure that every member of the United States Senate's mind is at least as quick as mine. I'll bake them all chocolate chip cookies. I'm very good at that. I worked as chief of staff to the Democrats in the state Senate in 1997, and I think that we fostered a very collegial environment. And some of the Republicans were collegial with us. Heck, Ted Ferrioli appeared as a fat cat business guy in our end of the session skit. I will appeal to the better instincts of my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans. I will act in the assumption that we all know what the big problems are in this country. We're all ready to do what it takes to solve them. Let's figure out how we can all do that and still get reelected.
Mr. Merkley, you have the option of a 45-second response.
You know, relationships matter incredibly. And when I became Speaker last year in 2007, the smart political folks came to me and said, Jeff, we're so sorry you're not going to pass any of your 12-point roadmap for Oregon and opportunity. I said, why not? And they said, there's a host of lobbyists ready to take on and defeat every one of those, and you just have a one-vote majority. Can't be done. Well, you know what happened? We passed every point. And one reason is I said, let's set aside the bitter partisan attitude that Grover Norquist and Dick Cheney and Newt Gingrich pursued. Let's realize that rural families and city families have the same problems around the kitchen table, the desire for a family wage job, for health care, and for education. And I brought folks together, built those relationships.
Thank you very much. Question for Mr. Merkley. America both depends on and resents undocumented workers who labor at jobs that many Americans won't accept, like harvesting crops, and take jobs like construction at lower wages than would be paid to legal residents. You recently voted in favor of a state law to require proof of legal residence in order to obtain a driver's license. How would you respond to those who say that your vote was an example of being punitive rather than smart in dealing with the complex phenomenon of illegal immigration? You have 60 seconds to respond.
What we have to recognize is we have chaos in immigration. It's chaos that has grown over 20 years of lack of attention from Washington, D.C. And we need to realize that we need to restore a framework of law. We need to take the 9/11 Commission recommendations that said we should double our border guards and use technology to seal our borders, and that we should end the job magnet, the employers who knowingly and willingly hire illegal aliens and thereby create the draw that drives this system. So here is the thing. We need to restore the rule of law, and then we need to use that framework of law to match labor supply with labor demand. And we need to have, as part of that structure, ordinary documents be reliable. The driver's license is simply a document that conveys legal presence, and it should require legal presence to obtain it. That's the policy in almost every state in this union.
Thank you. Mr. Novick, you have the option of a 45-second response.
My objection to the driver's license requirement is I don't think it'll solve any problems. I think it'll create one. I think people will keep on driving, but they'll drive without licenses, without insurance, and that'll drive up the insurance rates for the rest of us. The overall issue of immigration, illegal immigration, is a very difficult one. I think that unrestricted illegal immigration does, in fact, drive down wages in industries like construction. I also think it's not practical to pick up 12 million people and send them out of the country. So I agree with Barack Obama that we need to find a way to find a path to citizenship for folks who've been here a while, who violated no law other than being here without documentation, who are willing to pay some sort of fine and back taxes.
Thank you. Question for Mr. Novick. Senator Mark Hatfield brought tens of millions of dollars into our state for projects and facilities, ranging from light rail, streetcar, and highway projects to low-income housing and expansion of OHSU. This was done by the use of earmarks. Recently, that practice has undergone much criticism, and Senator McCain has said he would veto any bill containing earmarks if he becomes president. What is your position on the practice of using earmarks? You have 60 seconds to respond.
I am very disappointed in Senator McCain, who I know knows better, making it sound as if we could balance the federal budget by cutting earmarks. Earmarks are less than 1% of the federal budget. We shouldn't be building bridges to nowhere. But if we're pretending that you can balance the budget by cutting 1% of it, that's a bridge to nowhere too. I think that we should make the kind of investments that Senator Hatfield brought to the state part of official federal policy. I think we should invest in mass transit as part of federal policy. We should encourage and provide incentives to jurisdiction to do smart growth planning and to have mass transit. So I don't think that we eliminate earmarks. I think we shine a spotlight on them, as this Congress has done, but pretending that they're the only problem we have is silly.
Mr. Merkley, you have the option of a 45-second response.
Steve and I have a very similar point of view on this. Transparency is critical. Any request that is put forward ought to be labeled by the senator or the House member that's put it forward so it can be examined in the full light of day. And that's the kind of transparency we need to bring to all kinds of D.C. legislative processes. You might recall that Medicare Part D was written by lobbyists, not in front of the public. Huge bill brought to Congress basically in the middle of the night. No one knew what was in it. No one knew what it meant. That type of process has to change. We need to shine a lot more sunlight on our nation's capital.
Thank you. Question for Mr. Merkley. Controversy over options for a new I-5 bridge across the Columbia River is building in Oregon and Southwest Washington at a cost of upwards of $4 billion with no assured funding. Many are questioning how much of the price tag will come from federal sources. Others question the wisdom of spending $4 billion on a project that improves traffic flow but increases greenhouse gas emissions. What's your position on this project? And as a freshman senator, how would you be able successfully to advocate for a significant appropriation for it? You have 60 seconds to respond.
I think we do need a new crossing over the Columbia, but we need to focus as much energy upon the shape of the city and increasing transportation efficiency as it relates to global warming gases. In fact, we need to greatly increase light rail connectivity. We need to dive in and drive our nation with a cap-and-trade system that lowers global warming gases so there's a price tag on every bit of gas that goes into the atmosphere. And indeed, we need to change the way we think about the world. It isn't just about technology here or a limit there. It's about adopting a perspective of living in sustainability with this beautiful blue-green planet we inhabit.
The judges do not think you have responded. You have 60 seconds to respond.
I believe the question was whether I supported a bridge over the Columbia. I think I said right off the bat the answer to that was yes, but that is not where our transportation policy should stop.
They are objecting to your answer to the second part of your question, which I take it is how would you be able successfully to advocate for a significant appropriation for it? Is that correct, judges? That's correct.
Yes, successfully advocate by working closely in partnership with my colleagues in Washington, D.C. There are choke points all over this nation that need to be addressed. So it isn't just the question of addressing this checkpoint here or this checkpoint there. It needs to be part of a systematic transportation plan for improving and opening up both the transportation for individuals and the transportation for freight. Here in Oregon, we had a plan, and that plan was laid out, and it was Connect Oregon 1 to create and establish a priority set of choke points that we would undertake. We need that type of national coherence. My understanding is that this crossing would fit very well into that type of plan, and that's how we'd get it done.
Thank you. Mr. Novick, you have the option of a 45-second response.
I'll answer the second part of the question first. I think that a senator can advocate successfully for an investment in his or her region by explaining how this will enhance the economic health of the region, which is part of the economic health of the whole country, and by explaining how this will fit into our ongoing effort to fight global warming. The issue of the Columbia River crossing is one where I have very smart friends on both sides. I know some very smart people who care about the environment, think that the plan that's currently under discussion will both reduce greenhouse gas emissions beyond what would happen if we did nothing, and will be good for our economy, and will prevent congestion. I've also got good smart friends like Robert Liberty who think that you don't need to do this, that we don't need to build a new bridge, we can build more mass transit, we can have tolls.
Thank you for your response.
So the answer is, I don't know.
We now move to the next portion of the program. During this portion, each candidate will ask 3 questions of the other. Questions must be asked in 30 seconds. The opposing candidate will have 1 minute to respond, after which the questioner will have the option of a 30-second rebuttal. We will alternate between the candidates and begin with Mr. Novick. Mr. Novick, your first question for Mr. Merkley in 30 seconds.
Speaker Merkley, in your recent poll testing attacks on me, one of them was to call me a pro-tax advocate. Now, I would expect Bill Sizemore, Don McIntyre, or Grover Norquist to use that language to describe my proposal to have wealthy folks pay Social Security tax on all their incomes, or to have people who make money buying and selling stock pay the same tax rate as regular folks. But I'm surprised that you're adopting their rhetoric. Don't you know the damage this kind of rhetoric does to the political environment of Oregon?
Mr. Merkley, you have 60 seconds to respond.
Steve, I think from your comments earlier today, I don't think that pro-tax advocate would be incorrect. You have called for capital gains on the middle class. You have called for an increase in Social Security tax. You know, and here's the thing. 4 weeks ago, you put a poll into the field laying out a series of negative attacks on me. And indeed, today, what you did is attack me straight out of the box, as you have done in every forum we have gone to. You did it on the first day of this campaign. You did it in the summit over in Eastern Oregon. You did it in our debate in Eugene, while I was focusing on my background, my vision, my qualities for this office. So I think it would make a lot of sense to kind of step aside from that sort of approach and say, how are we going to take our country back? How are we going to step in and make this nation a far better place for all of us who live here?
Mr. Novick, you have the option of a 30-second rebuttal.
On the first day of this campaign, I learned for the first time that Speaker Merkley voted for a resolution that described the war in Iraq as an example of the courage of George Bush. I was surprised at that, and I did criticize it. But the difference between Speaker Merkley and me is that I criticize Democrats when they depart from progressive principles. He's willing to depart from progressive principles in order to manufacture attacks on me.
Mr. Merkley, your first question for Mr. Novick. You have 30 seconds.
Steve, your comments on the first day of campaign were a complete distortion. It's too bad. But I'll tell you, I'm inspired by Barack Obama, a fellow Democrat and one of most of our electrifying leaders. But this is your comment about him. Doesn't this prove Obama is just another captive special interest fraud who doesn't really care about global warming, doesn't deserve to be hailed as some great Kansas hope? That's a very personal attack. It's not about policy. Do you stand by this statement?
Mr. Novick, you have 60 seconds to respond.
That actually was not a statement. It was part of a list of obviously, deliberately over-the-top questions that I was suggesting people ask Earl Blumenauer in an appearance, interestingly, at the City Club. But yes, I have criticized Senator Obama and Senator Clinton, and sometimes I have used rather over-the-top language. But I've also praised them when they thought that they deserved it. And I think that if they read all of my comments, they would maybe be a little annoyed sometimes, but they would realize that I was criticizing them on the issues. I mean, I was criticizing Senator Obama because he voted for the sugar tariff, which I think prevents us from importing sugar cane that can be used for ethanol that's a lot more energy efficient than corn ethanol. So I think they will forgive me, just as I, Speaker Merkley, will forgive your supporters, Representatives Nolan and Greenlook, for calling me crass and selfish in a blog post that your campaign approved.
Mr. Merkley, you have the option of a 30-second rebuttal.
You know, I don't think there's any context that justifies calling someone a fraud. You know, you've also said, Obama gives me nothing to like very much, a complete sellout, a positions full of uninspiring problem on a variety of issues. Here's the difference. You respond to issues by tearing people down. I love to bring people together to build up a plan, to make that plan successful, and to change
Thank you very
our
much.
state.
Mr. Novick, your next question for Mr. Merkley. You have 30 seconds.
Speaker Merkley, there's a critical news story at the beginning of your campaign about your campaign making robocalls to people on the do not call list, and you'd recently passed legislation to prohibit that. I suspect you knew nothing about that. That was a campaign detail. But you did know that as Speaker, you had adopted a rule against raising money during the legislative session. And in the February session, you raised money. How do you explain that?
Steve, those are just the kind of attacks I've come to expect in this campaign. Well, let's take on robocalls, which indeed you accurately described. My campaign went to great lengths to hire an Oregon contractor who did not strip out the robocalls to the national no-call list, unfortunately. It wasn't the law yet, and it's a detail we never thought about. And those mistakes do happen. And in terms of the rules you referred to, those rules, as you well know, are laid out by Legislative Council as not applying to federal races. I do have a state PAC, and it did apply to my state PAC, and I did follow that rule. I also put voluntary pieces in place. I said I'm not going to raise money from anyone who has an interest before this legislative session. I'm going to make sure that happens, even though my competitor, if you will, is in full gear raising funds. I also passed the most comprehensive ethics changes that this state has ever seen. You should have seen the lobbyists at the start of the last session.
Thank you very much. Mr. Novick, you have the option of a 30-second rebuttal.
The rule that Speaker Merkley adopted said that legislators can't raise money during the legislative session. And many of those legislators have opponents who are gearing up to challenge them. But nonetheless, they were prohibited from raising money. Maybe that was a silly rule, but I think that if you adopted the rule, you should either repeal the rule or abide by it, rather than looking for an exemption for yourself, even if the lawyers say yes.
Mr. Merkley, your next question for Mr. Novick. You have 30 seconds.
Steve, you know I support Barack Obama, but I'm also excited about our other Democratic nominee, Hillary Clinton. I was thrilled that my daughter, after meeting Hillary, could now know that women can rise to the highest positions in the land. We're breaking all the molds. Here's another of your commentaries, in this case on Clinton. If Hillary Clinton is a coward on the war and a traitress on the First Amendment, why should we expect anything else when it comes to global warming? Do you stand by this statement? Yes or no?
Mr. Novick, you have 60 seconds to respond.
As I've said before, I feel passionately about the issues. I feel passionately about the First Amendment and about global warming and about the war. And sometimes in expressing my passionate criticism of specific policies, specific votes Democrats have cast, I have been certainly undiplomatic. I've also been criticized, by the way, by Barack Obama supporters for being way too nice to Hillary Clinton in my blog post where I endorsed Barack Obama. So again, I think that Senator Clinton has learned to be friends with Newt Gingrich. I think that she will be willing to forgive me undiplomatic comments in the course of expressing my opinions on issues.
Mr. Merkley, you have the option of a 30-second rebuttal.
You know, Steve, we agree on those issues, but we have a very different style. I keep trying to picture you going to Senator Obama or President Obama and saying, I've called you a special interest fraud, but please help me with those timber payments for Oregon. I keep trying to picture you going to President Clinton or Senator Clinton and saying, I know I said you were a coward. I know I called you a traitress, but can you please help me expand the Mount Hood Wilderness Area? I am so tired of the politics of tearing people down. It doesn't get things done in our capital here in Oregon. It doesn't get things done to help take our nation forward.
Thank you. Mr. Novick, your next question for Mr. Merkley. You have 30 seconds.
Speaker Merkley, in your poll, you attacked me for being pro-tax, for being not serious, and for having worked on political campaigns against Bill Sizemore, Kevin Maddox, etc. I'm just curious, what did your consultants tell you about which of those attacks worked the best? Which of those attacks can we expect to see on our TV screens and hear on the radio over the next several weeks?
Mr. Merkley, you have 60 seconds to respond.
Well, Steve, if you're going to bring over your poll you put out a month earlier attacking me in all kinds of negative ways, we can have a discussion about that. But I can tell you what I learned. I learned that my gut instinct about personal attacks, the attacks of character assassination, do not resonate in the state of Oregon. And I learned that when people are thinking about who they want to be a senator, they don't want a person who has simply been an advisor to political campaigns. They want someone who jumped into the fray, who dived in and brought people together, who did it against the odds. When I became Democratic leader 5 years ago, the Oregonian put the story on the obituary page. They said, you don't have any money, you don't have any consultants. But here's what we had. We had heart and we had vision. And the team of progressives proceeded to go about changing this state, and Oregon is back on track. Now we have to put our nation back on track.
Mr. Novick, you have the option of a 30-second rebuttal.
I'll tell you what we tested in our poll. We tested Speaker Merkley's votes. We tested his positions on issues. We didn't say Speaker Merkley is one of those say one thing and do another kind of politicians. Aren't you sick of that? We tested things, we tested policy issues. And as far as bringing people together, go to the Association of Oregon Counties, full of Republicans, which I brought together to oppose Don McIntyre's Measure 48 in 2006 and ask them if I'm not good at bringing people together.
Thank you. Mr. Merkley, your next question for Mr. Novick, you have 30 seconds.
Steve, here's another view of yours. If U2's Bono moves to Oregon, obtains American citizenship, and wins the Democratic nomination for the U.S. Senate, I will vote for Gordon Smith in 2008. You also wrote that you can say a lot of bad things about Smith, and I have, but you can't say he's unequivocally the most hypocritical human being on the face of the earth. That honor is reserved for Bono. Steve, why would Gordon Smith make a better senator than Bono?
Mr. Novick,
Well,
you have 60 seconds to respond.
I criticized Bono, as I have criticized various senators, as I've criticized Speaker Merkley on the issues. Bono is part of a band that goes around advocating third world debt relief, which is great, but that means that the taxpayers of the United States and other wealthy countries would have to give up some money, some tax money. Bono is a tax evader. His band stashes their money in tax shelters in the Netherlands. And I think that is hypocritical. And that gives me no basis to think that Bono would be any better senator than Gordon Smith.
Mr. Merkley, you have the option of a 30-second rebuttal.
The most hypocritical human...
Quiet, please.
The
Quiet,
the most hypocritical human on the face of the earth?
Yes.
This is a man who puts his actions where his heart is. He founded the One campaign to battle global AIDS and to fight extreme poverty. He took Treasury Secretary Paula Neal to Africa. He lobbied Congress. He has been a champion on AIDS and poverty and is credited with possibly saving tens of thousands of lives. This is not the place we need to attack each other. That's not the person to tear down.
Thank you. We will now move to the final portion of the program. 3-minute closing statements from each candidate. We will begin with Mr. Novick.
You know, in these campaigns, we can sometimes get caught up in the tactical back and forth, and actually sometimes it can be kind of fun. I think we've seen in the course of this day that there are serious differences between Speaker Merkley and me. Obviously, either one of us would be an improvement over Gordon Smith because neither one of us is Bono. But I want to talk for a minute about what my campaign is for. My campaign is based on the idea that we can tell voters the truth. Americans and Oregonians realize that we face big challenges that will require big changes, and that change requires some sacrifice. My campaign is based on the idea that you need to stand up for what is right. Standing up for what is right, rather than calculating what's most politically expedient in order to win an election. That distinction has never been so important in our nation's history as it is today. My campaign is based on the idea that you need to give people specifics when you talk about the issues. And if you go to my website, novickforsenate.com, you'll see a lot of specifics. And my campaign is based on the belief that the core American values of hard work, fairness, and opportunity are poised to make a comeback if we just have political leaders who are willing to fight for those values. My campaign is also based on something else. When I worked for the Federal Justice Department, some friends of mine and I started a tradition of celebrating Robert Kennedy's birthday, a tradition that continues to this day. I go back for it every year. The last thing Robert Kennedy said before he died, after winning the California primary, was, "I believe this is a great country, an unselfish country, a compassionate country. I intend to make that my basis for running." That sounds pretty good to me.
Thank you. Mr. Merkley, you have 3 minutes.
This is an extraordinary chapter in American history. Thousands of Oregonians are registering to vote. Thousands are turning out to hear Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. I'm not sure we've been this energized since Dr. King, who was assassinated 40 years ago today, shook the world with his "I Have a Dream" speech. King's dream of transformative politics is living on in this new movement to change America that we are witnessing here today. This Senate race is part of that movement. Oregon has a Senator, Gordon Smith, who has voted with Bush and Cheney 90% of the time. He is fundamentally out of sync with the state that I'm proud to say has the lowest opinion of Bush and Cheney of any state in the Union. Go Oregon! We need change. We need a champion who believes in transforming America, as I do. We need a champion who will take on the special interests and win time and time again, as I have. Now, Steve and I present two very different backgrounds. Steve has made his career as a professional political consultant. I have lived my life as a community activist and as a leader, diving in to bring people together, to launch programs, to forge solutions. Steve often makes his points by attacking and insulting, and that politics of tearing people down is just not where the future lies. I win battles by contrast, by pulling people together and attacking problems, not people. And then we make change. That's how it happens. You know, it's time for the politics of results, not the politics of insults. Steve has attacked some of our most inspiring leaders like Barack Obama. Well, you know what? I don't agree with Obama on every issue, but I love his vision of bringing people together, of dialogue, not demonization, of partnering to create real change. Isn't that an inspiring vision? We have a lot of work to do. We need to forge solutions to real challenges, but we also need to change the way that we think about each other in the world. We need to get out of Iraq, but we also need to recognize that our security is driven by international partnerships as much as by military might. We need affordable, accessible health care for every American, but we also need to recognize that wellness strategies need as much investment as healing strategies. We need to develop technologies to tackle global warming, but we also need a new ethic of living in sustainable balance with our planet. Fellow Oregonians, I have lived my life bringing people together, leading the fight, championing change, and as your senator, I will carry on this fight in Washington, D.C. with every ounce of my heart and soul. Together, we can put America back on track.
Gentlemen, thank you, and I think applause is now permitted and warranted. Good job, man. You're great. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
On behalf of the Civic Club, I want to thank Dr. Peter Steinberger for being our moderator today, John Horvick for being our timekeeper, our panelists, and most of all, our two candidates, Jeff Merkley and Steve Novick. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.